What was that? You wanted more cloning? Okay, well, you're in luck because we have a lot to do on this shot. This is in the same project, 4G VFX Dust and Gun done. That's a fun thing to say. Here at about a minute 24 seconds, we have this shot where she's walking away from the car. Let's go ahead and dive into Fusion. And we got a few things to do. One is we got to replace this blacked out license plate with one that isn't distracting. We got to take away this Maui Grown sticker. And we're also going to clone out this tent, which you could argue is necessary or not, but dang, it'll show us a lot about cloning, so we're going to do it. Let's start with the easy things. This license plate. This is going to be almost the same kind of workflow that we did with her eyes, but we're going to use an external image instead of a still frame. First thing let's do is put our LUT on, Blackmagic Design, 6K film. And really what we're going to do is grab an image of a license plate and just throw it on here. Now, how you would have to do this in real life for your project is take the real license plate and add different letters and everything to it, which is what I did, but we're not going to show that part because I don't want to show the real license plate. But I will show you once you have a good image how to put it on there. So let's go to Media Pool under VFX, right click and say Import Media. And we're going to import our fake license plate.tiff and hit open. And we'll drag this down to our flow. And let's name stuff. Let's call this original footage MI. This is going to be our license plate. Media in. We'll take the output of this and put it over our original footage. And let's take a look at what we got. Ooh, there's our license plate right there. And with our merge, we can probably just throw this over here. And we'll just scale this to be right over our real license plate here. One way to get this pretty darn close to right is if you take the blend down in the merge, just like 50%. You can size this, actually 0.5 should be about right. And then you just kind of move this around until it isn't blurry anymore. You're gonna be pretty darn close. Okay, that looks good. And then we just bring the blend back up, shoop. That's cool. But we have this kind of harsh edge around here and we want to blend this in a little more. So we're gonna add a soft mask. So in our license plate, let's select that and hit 1 on the keyboard to bring this up here. The reason we're doing this like this is so that we can add the mask on this image, which is just going to be a little bit easier later for sizing and the way that Fusion kind of works with that stuff. I'm going to select polygon mask for our license plate, and let's just disconnect it for a minute. And we're going to draw a little shape around our license plate like this. Boom. And connect it again. And now we're going to bring this like sort of towards the edges of the license plate like this. It doesn't have to be that perfect because it's just going to be soft. And let's soften this mask a little bit just so it looks decent. And now if we look here in our comp, this should be pretty darn good. Let's turn this off and on to see if there are any problems. I think for the most part, it's all right. I'd say we can move this around just a touch, something like that. Now, we're not going to get too crazy with this. We just want to make sure that that sort of works because this shot is a little bit shaky. We had to shoot this directly on the ground. And if we look really close and play this back, it does move around just a touch, which is not good. So what we got to do is stabilize this shot for this to actually stick to it. We either need to track this to the shot or stabilize the shot. And we're not really losing a lot by stabilizing the shot. Plus we have a bunch of other stuff to do. So it's going to be good for us to stabilize this. So let's go ahead and do that. And actually we kind of should have done this before we put this license plate on, but that's okay. We'll just select all of this and hit Control X, and that will copy it to the clipboard. And then we're just going to paste this back here again. Let's go back to the edit page, right click and say Reset Fusion Composition. That's going to get rid of any thinking that it's doing in Fusion. And we're just going to use the camera stabilizer built in here in the edit page because it's just real easy. So under Stabilize here where it says Perspective, let's click on Camera Lock and hit Stabilize. What that's going to do is do a pretty darn good job getting rid of that wobble. Look at that. It's like rock solid now. That's awesome. That's already stabilized. Then again, we're just gonna right click and say new compound clip. And we'll call this stabilized car rear. Hit create. Now we'll bring this into Fusion. And remember, we have those nodes copied to our clipboard. I'll just double click here in the flow and hit Control V. That'll bring that back. And it looks like it's attached, but it's not. It's a lie. So let's just attach this back. And there we go. Everything's okay. And now look what happens. Now it's like so solid, dude. That looks so good. Of course, we don't have this quite positioned right because it's a little different. We'll move this around in the merge and make sure it looks good. And if you zoom way in, you can kind of tell that it's like a little janky, but even at 100%, like nobody's gonna care or notice. Looks great. One thing we'll also add in this Fusion part here is this should probably be a little blurrier, I'm thinking. I always want to match the blur and stuff. Maybe not. Maybe it's okay. Let's go ahead and add our LUT. Make sure that's looking good still. And I think it's going to be fine, actually. All right, let's take our Maui Grown out. This we're actually going to use real proper cloning for, just like you would in Photoshop or something like that. Really what we've done so far is grab a patch, either from a still frame or from an image, and just kind of paste it over things. But this time we're really going to duplicate the actual image. So how are we going to do that? Well, we're going to use a node called Paint. Actually, let's do this before our merge. Right after our original footage, I'll hit Shift Spacebar and type Paint. And that's going to add a Paint node. Now, a Paint node does like 100 things. You can think of it as anytime that you're like doing some detailed work on actual pixels, or whether you're like literally making paint strokes, that kind of stuff happens on a Paint node. But it's really good for cloning. So I'll just switch this to one viewer, keep things simple. And a couple things we need to do to set up this Paint node. Here in the inspector, we need to switch this apply mode to this second one, this clone. And then up here above our viewer, we need to not click on the one that looks like clone. We need to click on the one next to it. It's a little confusing. So it's like over here, the 2 paintbrushes, up here, the 1 paintbrush. And now it's basically in Photoshop mode. So if you hold down Alt, you can pick a place to clone from. And if you let go of Alt and just paint, that will clone from that area. And by default, I think this brush is probably set up decently. It needs to be pretty soft and about maybe a little smaller than this. Let's take the size down a touch. Something like that. You can also hold Control and drag to drag the size. So I'd say something like that. And we can really just pick a place on this car that's sort of close to our sticker here, and then just start to paint over that like this. And you kind of just keep going over it until it looks right. Something kind of like that. Now, it's kind of tricky with this because this light is kind of gradating across this section here. And so you really kind of got to match the lighting, which is the tricky part about cloning, because you can easily kind of zoom out and it looks all patchy. So it might take a few tries. One thing that also helps is if you take the opacity down, like 50, you can pick a place like this and kind of go over it in a few places to kind of blend that lighting in. And that helps to kind of feather this out a little bit. All right. And the more you can kind of get this feathered out, the better. Takes a little messing with. But again, at 100%, if it doesn't stick out to you, it's probably fine. Even though if you looked really closely, you could probably tell. It's one of those things where you're never going to know. Let's fix the order of our color correction here. Again, let's go into this compound clip, open it in the timeline. We'll take this color, remove attributes, color correction, hit apply. We'll go back to our timeline and we'll put that color back here. And now we see we've kind of messed up the color a little bit. So let's make sure that's good. Let's go back to our Fusion page. We can see with our LUT on, this is just a little bit darker. That's just because of the colors that the TIFF uses compared to the type of media that we're distributing with the training. So if we turn this off and on, we see it's kind of a lot darker and bluer and more saturated and stuff. Let's adjust this placement a little too. So what we can do to adjust this is just add a color corrector node like this. When you're working with like camera original stuff that is really high quality and hasn't been transcoded, this probably won't be much of a problem. But for now, we can fix the major problems like saturation probably needs to come down a bit. Contrast probably can come down just a touch until this blends a little better. And we also want to make sure that under options here, we have pre-divide post-multiply on, because that's going to clip this color correction just to this license plate. So now if we turn this off and on, we see we're just getting rid of some of that blue, getting rid of some of that contrast. So we definitely want that to match. Take this contrast down just a touch more. And we can turn on and off the merge to kind of get a pretty good idea of if this is working or not. If it doesn't look offensively different, it's probably fine. I'd say it's maybe just a little too much contrast still. Take this contrast down a touch more. Something like this, it should be pretty okay. Let's go back to the edit page. And as long as it just doesn't look like it's sticking out like crazy, like this is a fake license plate, it's gonna be all right. Feel free to dial that into taste. But we have a lot of our problems solved here. We have our license plate changed. We have our paint. Ooh, this messed up the thing too. Let's go back and open this back in the timeline. Make sure this is stabilized. There we go. It got rid of our stabilization. So now we have it stabilized. Let's go back to our timeline. Onto the Fusion page. I'd say this still looks good. Let's maybe just move this over a touch. There we go. All right, back in business. Let's see how this looks full screen. Looks pretty good. I'd say right here at the end, it kind of jumps a little bit. We can probably just trim this and it wouldn't matter. Jump, 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 and then it jumps. Let's just roll this edit back. I'll hold down Alt and just roll it back a couple frames. And I think that will be just fine. Now let's take a look. Yep, looks fine. All right. Next, we're going to take a look at cloning out this tent.